Welcome back. I want to talk today about using blueprints, what blueprints are, how we can use them to our advantage as designers. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to do a series of videos. The first one is going to cover how to make a door that when the player approaches the door, a key will allow for the door to open, and then the door will close behind you once you enter it. And the second video I'm going to do is going to cover lights that can be turned on or off with the use of your keyboard. And this is an example here I've got on the screen of my guy. I've got it all set up. I have a door right there. This is the base file that is located in my Google Drive that I'm going to have you download. It's going to provide you with that wall and the door and the floor and the lighting, and everything is all set up ahead of time. It also contains a third-person game setup, and it also contains some props, which I'll be talking about here as I go. And you can see I've got a whole bunch of them down here. These are from a program or a file that you're going to be using later on in the semester, but I'm giving you some of these elements now to use. We don't need them all, but we just need a couple of them. So what I have here is I have the player. When the player approaches the door and then hits the E key on the keyboard, the door opens up. The player can enter, and then the door shuts behind him. And you can turn around and do the same thing here. The door will open up, and then you can go and pass through the other way. And then the door shuts behind you. Now, why is this important? Well, as a blueprint, unlike the older versions of Unreal, if I was going to set this up, and you have to assume that your environment has multiple doors, what I would have to do is I would have to go in and set this up every time I wanted to use an openable door. So if my building has 10 entrances and exits, and there's multiple doors within the building, let's say, then every time I wanted to create a door that opened up that, in essence, has a trigger, there's an invisible trigger in front of that door, has a trigger that I step on, and that allows something to work, I would have to do that for every door in my building. I would have to do the same setup for every one of them. They were all independent manufactured doors. So I would have to go in and set up an animation and a trigger, and you'd step on that trigger, and it was all local. Everything was handled on the spot. And then if I had another door, I'd get to do the same thing all over again. You can't pick up and use the door over and over and over again. Well, the additions of blueprints have been a godsend, because what we can do now is I can create a class of doors that open, and they open on a key command. So what I can do is I can create one door, and I can animate that one door using a couple of triggers. You step on the trigger, and it's actually a trigger box. You step into a trigger box, then the E key works on your keyboard, the door opens up, you walk through it, and then if you approach the door from the back side, you have another trigger box that you step into, and then the E key will then open up the door back the other way. And the beauty of it is that I can then take that entire door system and copy it and use it in hundreds of places, thousands of places. I can have every door work exactly the same, or I can, if I need doors to work, to maybe a couple of the doors to work slightly different, maybe instead of the E key on your keyboard, which is what we're going to set this up for today, maybe what you want it to do is you would like to have a key that has to be picked up somewhere, and the system has to sense whether or not you've actually picked up a key and hold that key in your possession before that door can be opened. So every time you go up to it at that point, it's locked. You go find the key, and you come back, and it then opens up once it knows that you're holding the key. That's going to be the third video we're going to do in this series. But right away, first thing I want to do is I just want to get a basic door set up so we can run up to it, hit the E key, run through it, step back here. The door will close behind me. I can come back up. I step on the trigger, hit the E key again. The door opens up, and then I can pass through it, and it'll freeze on me, and then I'm through the door, and I'm all set. So that's what we're going to focus on here to begin with. So you might want to download the starter file from the Google Drive. Let me get out of that. Your Google Drive, if you're going to do that, it's going to be called Blueprint Start _ 2018, and in that you're going to see The file is going to be there. You're also going to have some content already built into it. And what that is going to give you is going to give you basically this level. So you're going to see the walls, the door in place with minus the blueprint door, which I'm going to remove. But I've already got it done. That's how I was able to show it to you. And then we'll build it and get it all set up. And then we'll move on to the second one, which is a switchable light, in the next video. So you want to open up that file and take a look at it. And I'm going to go ahead here and I'm just going to replace that door with the basic door. So I don't have that blueprint in there anymore. And we'll start over. And just to make sure that that's not there anymore, just so you know, I can go up to the thing, hit my E key. Nothing is happening because that's just a door. It's just an asset. It doesn't do anything. It's not set up and it's not ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to start and we're going to actually build a blueprint class. We're going to add some nodes to it. And then we're going to substitute that new blueprint door for my door right here. So let's talk about how to create a blueprint so we know exactly what we're doing on this. There's a couple of ways to do it. I'm going to show you one way using the door. I'm going to show you another way to create a blueprint once we get into the light. And then you can use either system that you want. Personally, I prefer the one I'm going to show you right here for the first one because I think it's the easiest. But it depends on what you're doing and how many elements you're going to have as part of your blueprint. This is just going to be a door, so it's a pretty easy way to start and works pretty well. First thing you want to do is you want to select the object in your content browser there. You want to select the object that you want to make the blueprint out of, and then you're going to right-click on it. And what you're going to see here is under Asset Actions, which is about in the middle of that. And we'll be referring to Asset Actions a lot in through here. One of the things that I do a lot is I go to earlier or later versions of the software, 4.15 or 4.18, and I have levels that I'm using that I build with in later versions that don't work in this earlier version, but I can go in here and you'll notice that there is an export in here. I can go into a later version and select models and textures and I can export them out and come back into an earlier version and rebuild them again. In fact, that's what you're looking at on the screen. Both the floor, the concrete walls, the concrete doorway, and the door were all exported out of a version of the program 4.18, and I brought them into another file and I reassembled them. In essence, I had to rebuild them so that they would work. You can't use a 4.18 model in a version 4.8. So I have to go in and I have to do that. You also have Migrate there. And Migrate is a handy tool. One of the ways that I got the light into here, it comes from the complete content. So if you open up a new document and you add all the starter content, you get all the base models and all the textures, but your project is exponentially bigger. Because I only needed to get the lamp and its associated textures, what you can do is you can go into any project that you have, and you can select an object, and then you can do Asset Actions and then go to Migrate. And what it does, which is really nice, it will then go and say, well, I'll give you an example. I'll go ahead and select Migrate here. It'll say, look, it goes and gets everything that it needs, everything that's associated with that door. It goes and gets the textures, it gets the materials, it gets everything associated with it, and then allows you to place it wherever you want. So I can say save selected and it'll ask me where I want to save it. I can put it into another game level or another game project. I can do all kinds of things with it. It does mean that if you're working in a file and you can't import per se. You can only do a migrate, which means you actually physically have to go to the file or to the level or to the project that you want to take that model from, and then you have to, in essence, migrate it out of that file and into another one, and then go back and reopen that file again. So it is kind of awkward, but it is really helpful when you need to get something, and if you've got another game level that's got models or textures or whatever, it makes it very easy for you to go get it and bring it and drop it in. Cancel that. All right, so I'm going to right click, I'm going to go up to Asset Actions, and I'm going to create blueprint using this. All right, then it's going to ask you where you would like to put it. Now, by default, it will try to create a blueprints folder, and if you would like to put it in your blueprints folder, that's fine. It just kind of keeps everything separate For me personally, I tend to keep it in with everything else. In this particular case, you can see I've got my blueprint door over here. It's in here. That way I have all my assets together, whether they're a blueprint or not. And you'll also notice that you can tell the difference between the two, partly because it's renamed, but because it has this little sphere in the bottom right-hand corner. So you can tell at a glance how many blueprints I have in this folder down here, but I still got all of my assets together and I'm keeping them all in here. So I'm going to leave that up to you as to how you want to do it. In my particular case, mine is in the WoW content and it is in static meshes, and I'm going to put it in there. Okay, so it tells me that it already exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to rename this. And I am going to put the BP on it. That's just kind of a good way to also keep things set up. I'm going to call it BP_door1. And it's down over here in the bottom. Okay. And you'll also see that there's a little asterisk on it. Now that means that it hasn't been saved yet. So right away I'm just going to go up and I'm going to do a quick save all so it's taken care of. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on it to open it up. And let's talk about what this window is and how it works. I think I'll pop this up full screen. Might be a little bit easier so we don't see any of the background stuff. Okay, a couple of things that we need to know. First of all, it looks different than any other window we've dealt with, and that's because it's technically a separate program within the Unreal Engine. But what we have here is we've got some basic tabs we need to talk about. On the left over here, I have a Components tab. I have a My Blueprint tab. And then in the middle, I've got three tabs. I have Viewport, I have Construction Script, and I have Event Graph. And then on the right over here, I have a Details tab. And the Details does pretty much what you think it would do. If you select an object, usually what happens is you have details over here for things that you can go and make changes to. In this particular case, these elements don't have anything that you can have in a detail panel. But if I click on my static mesh over here in my component, my static mesh actually is the door itself. Right? And if I do that, which is that door right there, I can click on it. It's selected. It's got a little yellow box around it. Deselect it or select it. I can either click on it in here. This is the Viewport tab, or I can click on it over there. You can see that on the right over here I have all the basic information that pertains to it. What kind of a collision that there is on it, what the mesh is, what the texture is, the physics, all of that good stuff is over here. And it's all of the default settings. I really don't need to change anything different about it, except what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name of it up here. I'll call it Door Mesh. And when I change the name up over there, the name changes over here in my component. Now the component are all of the elements I'm going to be assembling together as I do things. So in the case of this door, I'm going to have a couple of triggers that are going to be associated with the trigger boxes. When I get to the light, you're going to see I actually have a model and two lights and a trigger and text. I'm going to have a lot of things going on in that one, but for this one, it's going to be a fairly simple, straightforward one. So that's just called Door Mesh, and I'm basically set up and ready to go. Those are the three elements. Now, this construction script, we're not going to do anything in this particular video dealing with the construction script. All you need, because we're going to be doing everything here in what's called the event graph. And what you can do right away is you can open this up and you can select everything and delete it. What they've done is they've put some basic elements that are in there for you to work with if you need them. I've found it's just a pain, and I just delete them and do everything I need to do. That way I don't have unused nodes hanging around. Or I think that if I'm doing something, I need to use one of those nodes, and I don't. Most of the things we're going to do don't use any of those nodes today. So you can just open that up and delete them. The new nodes that are going to be in here, this is where all of our blueprinting is going to happen. And blueprinting is visual scripting. All of the nodes that we're going to be using are basically code. And what we're able to do is to come in here and string nodes together. Most of the nodes you'll see have several slots on them. So we'll have one that maybe says is visible, and it determines whether or not an object is visible on the screen. Or we'll have a key enter node that will go in here, and the key enter node will have a couple of slots that we can take and wire into other nodes. And we're going to be building, but by wiring these nodes together, we're creating custom coding but we're doing it visually, which is a whole lot easier than having to learn all the coding. If you're a code person, obviously you can go back and do all of that. It works pretty well. You can actually open up blueprints in code and see everything that you've done in code form. But the visual coding for most of us is a great way to go. Okay, so everything we're going to do is in through here. Know, though, that everything inside of the event graph, all of the noding that we're going to do, and by the way, when we get done, it's going to look something like this. These are the nodes for the door. So we're going to be doing all of this, and we're going to be getting all of this set up. And you can see that I've got a front trigger here. I've got a rear trigger or a back trigger right there. I've got the door opening, and I've got some nodes that handle all the opening of the door, open and closing of the door. And then I've got a section down here that says basically when the game plays, this is what's supposed to happen as soon as the game starts. So all of these different node systems all cover coding, and this is where we're going to kind of go with. But everything that you see contained within this window, all of that coding, and this is actually a relatively small one, by the way. Everything that you see included in here is actually part of this construction script right there. These can be deleted. I can open, I can add, I can subtract, I can take all of these if I want to and just hit delete and get rid of them all. However, the construction script cannot be removed because this has to be there. Basically what Unreal says is you're using Blueprint. It actually looks, when you place a Blueprint object in the scene and you go to play the level, what it does is it compiles the construction script, which is everything that you see here. So it doesn't have to read all of these elements individually. It just scans and reads this one construction script. And so it's always here. You're always going to have a construction script tab, and you're always going to have at least this. When we get to the light, you're going to see we can actually make additional changes in here. We can add things into here that function on a higher level. This is the lowest level. This controls the door. If I need to change the way blueprints in general work, then it's going to go back up here. And then the viewport shows you everything that you're going to have in your scene. So right now our blueprint is empty. All right, now across the top up here you have a compile button. The compile is what is going to tell you whether or not what you're doing is correct. So because we are writing visual code, the engine has to know whether or not what you're doing is correct. That's what the compile button is. When you click the compile button, if what you're doing is accurate and correct in terms of the code, which this is because I don't have anything in here, I get a little green checkbox, and I can click save, and anything that I've done in here I know that is done correctly because it's compiled correctly, and then I have saved it as I go through and do stuff. As I add more things in here and add new nodes in my event graph, I will get a visual representation in here. If I do something wrong, it will give me a little red bar on it and tell me I've done something wrong. And also, if I try to compile it and I've got errors in here, it'll give me one of those little international no symbols, the red circle with the line through it, that tells you that what you have isn't working. And maybe you forgot to wire something, or maybe you tried to wire something and you weren't sure what you were doing, and you tried to wire nodes together. And you'll see as we go through it, nodes can only be wired a certain way. It's difficult to make mistakes with that, but you can forget to add certain things that a node may require. Some nodes that we're going to be using have requirements that must go with it, and if you forget one of those, you'll get a little no symbol up here saying, yeah, it isn't any good. Right? And then I think the rest of the stuff we'll kind of go through as we do things. The variables down over here on the left-hand side, we're going to be adding some variables in through here because there are going to be times when we need to set something up. Like in the case of this door, we are going to be asking the musical question, is the door open? Because that's going to make a determination as to whether or not the player can open the door. If the door is already open, you don't want the door opening up again. We're going to set the door to open up 90 degrees. So the door is going to basically swing open 90 degrees, and we're going to be able to then walk through the door. If the door is halfway open, let's say it's at 45 degrees, and the player hits E on the keyboard again, then what would happen is the door would then continue to open. It'll open up another 90 degrees from there. So now you're at 135 degrees, And then if the player hits the E key several times, it would then add up 90 degrees, and the door would probably swing through the wall, and it would look really odd. So what we need to do is we need to have some variables that ask if the door is open. If the door is open, then only certain things can happen. Or, in this case, something can't happen, which means the E key will only allow the door to open once until the cycle is completely done, to prevent that from happening. We're also going to have a variable in here telling us where the door is in the world, because I'll talk about that at the end. But without this little bit of code at the very end of this thing, you'd find that the door would work in one spot and the world in one spot only. If you tried to move it to another location in the world, then the door wouldn't function correctly. So we're going to add a couple of these variables down here, and the variables we'll talk about when we do those are things like floats or booleans and those kinds of things. If you've done any kind of coding, arrays are up there. If you've done any kind of coding, you're going to be familiar with most of the terms that are up there. And when we start creating those, I'll show you where they are and how they change and kind of what they do. So what I've got here is basically, to start with, I have my door here in place. And it says up here, BP Door 1 is the name of it. The door mesh is in here. And what I need to do is I'd like to have this thing set up. In order for the door to open, I need to have some sort of an object that the player will step into or step on, however you would like to do it, that will allow the coding to happen. And that's real common with almost all the Blueprint things that we create. You don't want the door randomly opening, and you don't want the door opening when it's not supposed to open. It needs to open during a specific sequence. And in this particular case, I don't want that door to open until the player is standing right in front of it. I don't want you to be able to open up the door from 25 feet away. I need this to behave like a regular door. You have to be on top of it so you can reach out and grab the handle and open it up. Now, we don't create animations of doors open, of the player reaching to the door and turning that doorknob and opening it up. What we do is we replace that with keyboard stroke. So I'm going to have it where the E key will open up the door once I get there, but I don't want that working until I actually step inside of a trigger box or a trigger volume. You can call it either a box or a volume, whatever you'd like it to be. So what I need to do is I need to take this particular component, this door, and I want to add a second component to it. And so to do that, I'm going to click on the green button up here that says Add Component, and we have a complete list of objects that are in here, all of the things that we can add into this. There's lights in here, there's a decal in here, there's text fields that are in here, there's other actors that we can do, there's all kinds of things that we can link to this. In this particular case, what I want is I want something in which the player has to collide with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get something called a box collision. And when I click on that box collision, what it's going to do is it's going to add that collision right there. Now you'll notice that it has a pivot point on it. I've got the little pivot arrows here. If I click on the door, I don't get that. And that's because the door is locked at 0, 0, 0. So there isn't any way for you to move that door someplace else. So, and the reason for that is because the door is already set up. The door has its pivot point already. The pivot point on the door is over here along this side, right at the bottom. And so all I have here is a representation of that door that I'm adding everything else to. So I don't have the ability to change that door. I can't rotate it 90 degrees. I can't do anything. But objects that I add in, or components that I add in, I can do other things with. I can pick this up and move it around. Or I can switch it here and I can rotate it in another angle. Or I can scale this thing up bigger or smaller. What I want to do with this is I need to place this trigger volume right in front of the door. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of position it around, and I'm going to slide it over. And I'm also going to take it and pull it in front of the door. It doesn't need to be below it. Let me pull this up so it's about in the middle of that door, I think, right there. Just about in the middle of it. All right, and I'm going to pull it so it's about a foot out in front of the door. Okay, now one of the things you have to be aware of with trigger volumes is that when we have a trigger going into something and we have a trigger coming out again, which I'm going to have a trigger on the other side of the door, triggers can't overlap. if a trigger overlaps, what happens is if I step inside of one trigger, I'm in essence stepping inside of both triggers. So what you're doing is you're sending double elements, or double commands to the program. And so you're trying to open up the door one way, and it's trying to open up the door the other way at the same time. So we need to make sure that these trigger boxes are well away from each other. The other thing I've got is I need to make sure that I'm not standing like in the middle of the door before it's triggered. I'd like to be able to trigger that a little bit further in advance. So usually the person is going to stop about that far away from a door. When you walk through a door, you don't like get right with your face up against it and then reach for the doorknob. You reach for the doorknob and you grab it when you're about, your body might be about that far away from the door. So that's about what I'm going to do for the same thing. I am going to change the size of that box, however, because I need to just make sure that my player enters into that box adequately. I want to make sure that I'm not like standing just a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. I'm not trying to make that this trigger tricky or make it hard to find. It needs to be obvious. The player can't see it, but it needs to be obvious that you've stepped in front of that door and that you've activated the trigger. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using the scale tool in this particular case, because I'm not a real big fan of using the scale tool on things, I'm actually going to use the scale over here in my transform in my details panel. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, let's just go ahead. In fact, I'm not even going to use scale. I'm going to use the box extent. Under shape, you have the actual size of that box. In this case, it's 32 units square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, well, X here is my side to side on this one. I'm going to make that 64. I'm going to make it about twice as wide as it was. And in terms of height, I'm going to set this at about maybe 100. And that way I know that if I approach the door from the side, if I jump up, whatever it is I happen to do, it's about the size of the door here. It's about 100 units by 64. It's about the size of the door, and it's about a foot in front of it. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I need to give this one a specific name because I'm going to be using that name when I start doing my nodes back over here in my event graph. So over here on the left, up where it says components, I'm just going to go ahead and double click there on that box. I'm going to type in door trigger front and hit enter. And that is now my trigger for that. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another one, right? Because I need one from the back. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to add component. I'm going to add another box collision. It's going to come in at exactly the same place. It's just with this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it back behind the door, and I'm going to make a little bit of a change to this. I'll get it kind of centered here again. And pull this up so it's about halfway in the door. The reason I do that is because when I set it to be 100, the same size as the front one, then it's going to go up and down. Otherwise, I got to move it again. So I'll center it right there. And we'll do the same thing. I'm going to make the X width 64, and I'm going to make the Z height 100. Okay. What I'm going to do with this one, however, is I'm going to keep the door trigger back just a little bit further. Pull this down. That's good. It's going to be a little bit further behind the door. And I'll check maybe my top view to make sure that I've got this thing in here correctly. Well, that's going to be pretty good, I think. I've got about the same width and height. There's my door. Okay, there's my front trigger. There's my rear trigger. Okay, and if I that's about right. I think what I'll do is I'll take this front one. I'm going to move the front one just a little bit closer, but I'm going to keep the back one a little bit further back. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because what's going to happen here is as I walk through the door, which is going to be going in through this way, the door is going to open up and it's going to swing away. When I approach the door from the back side, however, when this door swings open, the door has collision on it, and my player has collision. So you know perfectly well what happens in the real world if you stand in front of a door that opens towards you, and you're standing a foot in front of it, and you grab a hold of this and swing it up, or swing it back. It's going to hit you right in the face. because the door is solid and you're solid. So the door is going to hit you in the face. And if you keep pulling on that door, it's basically going to eventually push you backwards until the door can swing open and you can get through it. And the exact same thing is going to happen in here. If I put this so close to the door that I have to be right up against the door to trigger it, then as the door swings open, it hits the player and pushes the player back. And that's kind of a weird thing to see. So way this one is it allows me to stop just a little bit further away from the door. And then as the door swings open, I'm back away from it, and then I can walk through the door. So the back trigger you want to make sure is a little bit further behind the door than the front one is in front of it. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to rename this one. We'll call this one door trigger, and I'll call it back, I guess. I got the front trigger, and I got the back trigger. All right. Now, look at your variables down below over here. You'll see that there are 3 variables there. There is a door trigger back, a door trigger front, and a door mesh. As I made those components up here, it added them in down below. All right. Now, right above that, it says variables, and there's nothing in there. All right. As we add some variables here, things are going to start to appear over here. But these basically are the 3 elements that I'm dealing with, and there they are all up and through here as well. The other thing you'll notice is the door trigger. Both of the door triggers are indented underneath the door mesh. What that is an indication of is that they are all linked together. So wherever the door goes, those meshes are going to go with it. Okay. There are going to be some times when we have things that are indented again underneath it, that means it's linked to another object. And let's say I have a door, or I have a light on the door, and it's a separate model or a separate asset that has to move with the door, then it would be underneath and be indented. And maybe I wanted to work with 2 other objects, or I've got 2 lights, which we're going to do in the next one, where I have a light model or a sconce, and I'm going to have 2 lights that are attached to it. They're both going to be indented underneath it to tell you that they are both part of it. But there, you might have an instance where you bring that light into here, and I have a door, and I have a light. Wherever the door goes, the light has to go. But wherever the light has to go, the 2 light bulbs have to go with it, if that makes sense. So just know that if these things are indented under here, that means that they're all going to move together. If you have an object that is not indented, that means it's not going to move with the basic element that you've got. Okay, and it's just really a matter of just grabbing something and dragging it up like this, and you can see it's now part of it. Or I can just drag that out of here and go back up to this one. And attach it to that, and it comes back, and it's now part of the door mesh again. It's not linked to something else. All right, so I've got those 2 things in here. I'm going to hit compile, and I'm going to hit save, just in case something happens. I don't want to lose everything else that I have going on here. And that's your basic setup. It kind of makes sense for you to see how that all kind of goes together. I've got a door. I have a trigger in the front that I step into. It's going to make the door open away from me. I'm going to have a back trigger. When I come back to that door, I step into the trigger and hit the E key. The door is going to swing open. I'm going to be able to come through, and the door is going to automatically shut behind me. Now remember, there's a tutorial that goes with this. I don't know if I didn't mention that at the very beginning or not. There is a tutorial that goes with this. It's out there in Canvas, and it's going to go through and do everything that I do. If you are trying to do this, you're following along, and something is not working, just make sure you go back and reread everything that's in there, so you know that it's working, or that you've done everything that you're supposed to, and then that way you can get it all to work the way that you want. What we're going to do now is we're going to go in and we're going to start working on your event graph, because this is where the actual magic takes place. This is where we're going to use logic to do the things that we need to do on this one, so we can make things work the way we want them to work. So what I need to have, and you kind of have to think logically when we're working with this, because it is logic, we are working with code. And what we want to do is I want to create an element that when I step into the trigger, something happens. And then I also conversely want it, if I'm not standing on the trigger, I don't want something to happen. So what we need to do is we need to go in there and we need to say, create a node that is going to determine if the player is in contact with the trigger, and then when the player is no longer in contact with the trigger. So the way to do that is you click on the door trigger front, because I'm going to do that one first. We're going to click on the door trigger front, make sure that it's highlighted, and then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to right click. Now this is our elements for blueprints. You've probably seen them in the other videos if you've watched the videos like you're supposed to. And you know that this is the list of all of the nodes that are in here. There are probably close to 500 of them. They cover a wide variety of things, from characters to output text on the screen, to audio, to animation sequences. There's all kinds of stuff in here. In fact, the entire animated character, that third person, is a blueprint in and of itself that contains all of the information. It's a lot more sophisticated, and anytime you want to, feel free to go track down that third person blueprint that's in there. I think he's in the character folder. Open that up and look at all the code that's in there that controls everything about the way that player works. But all of that stuff comes out of here. And whenever we need to get a node, we can do it. And they're really nice that they give you a search bar there, so you could actually search for things, and they allow you to search either by context, or you can just search just in general for a name. Now in this particular case, because I need to get the two initial actions, they're always listed at the top. I need to get when you step on the trigger and when you are no longer stepping on the trigger. And I'm dealing here with my front trigger at this point. So right there at the very top of this, it says add event for door trigger front. Now, call function on door trigger front is a little bit different. I've got some elements that are in here, and if I open up the add event for door trigger, okay, you'll see why I went for this one. It's because it deals with collision. Now this one down here deals with collision, but they're a little bit different than these are. There's only a couple of them in here. These are a lot more complicated, and you'll also notice they have these little colored icons in front of them. We'll talk more about the colors later on. Right now I'll just tell you that colors can only be wired to same things on other colors. And we're not looking for something specific. We're not looking to do like get, move, ignore actors. We don't need any of that stuff that's in there. Mine is much more basic than that. I'm basically looking to add a component that says beginning overlap. So whenever I start out with a trigger, I'm always going to go in right away and get add on component begin overlap. And it pops up a red box that looks like this. This is a node. A couple things that are happening there. If you hold the mouse over it, your cursor over there, it will tell you what it's doing, and it'll tell you what it can be used for. It is written by, technical people, so, don't get too excited about that. You may not still understand what it says, but know that this is the basic element that we need to have when we are doing something like that. Now, they always come in pairs. If I step on the trigger, something's going to happen. I'm going to go back to my door trigger front. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go back to the same section, and I'm going to get end overlap. So when I'm no longer standing on that trigger, something different is going to happen. So as we do these triggers, we're always going to have the door trigger front begin overlap and the door trigger front end overlap. So I step on it, something happens. Step off of it, something happens. Okay, now the nodes have all of these slots, and again, you're seeing colors in through here. They have to do with classes. There are like the other actor and other components are like this, baby blue. You can only get another blue actor or blue element to be wired into these. I say wired because you're going to see we're going to pull a wire out of there and do something. There's green ones for other body index, from sweeps, sweep results. There's all kinds of elements going on in here. Strictly speaking, I'm only concerned about one thing. This is the entry point. Step on the trigger, step off the trigger. I really don't need any of these other elements right now. Okay, the only thing I am concerned with is this little arrow node right here. This is the one that then leads me to the next node. So whenever we want to hook up multiple nodes, what we do is we just left click on that little thing and pull away a wire. And it says right there, place a new node. When I let go of this, I'm going to get that same search box. and you can then type in the name of what you want. If you don't do anything and you just left click, it just goes away. Okay, the same thing can be true out of all these. I pull that away. Okay, I'm going to get that. You'll see it says component reference here. The color of the box that I pull out of, the slot that I'm pulling out of, determines what my options are. So if I go here and say from sweep, it's red, actions taking a Boolean. A Boolean is a true, false, yes or no statement. The choices that I have down here have to do with Booleans. So if I were to say, look under class, under primitive component, set check async scene on move, set generate overlap events, yes or no, true or false. That's what these things all have to do within here. If I go back to the green one and pull the green one away, it says actions taking an integer or a number. So if I go in here, there's math, and I can say, let's go to date and time. I can set the days of the year, or is it a leap year? I can put a calendar in there and those types of things. I can display a calendar or whatever I wanted to do coming out of that. So the color that you see here determines what kind of an element can go into that. Now, if you just pull out of the white one, that means you're just moving off to the next node, which is what I want, because here's what I'm doing. If I step on that trigger, what is it that I want to happen? Well, I would like to have to activate a key that is then going to open up a door. So when I step on that trigger, what I need to do is I need to enable a key on my keyboard. So in order to do that, and it takes a while to get to understand how to search for things, I'm looking to put input on my keyboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say over here, enable input. And I can see I get a lot of different ones that are in here. It'll highlight the one it thinks that you want. And again, it's based off of, you notice that those are blue Fs that are on there, blue functions. F is for function. It's giving me the choices that it assumes that I want to do. In fact, it gives me about the only choices I can do. So I can go in here and I can select, oh, look, it says enable input is probably what you're looking for. So it goes ahead and it brings it up. And it's pre-wired in and it's all ready to go. So now what happens is when I step on the trigger, it's going to enable an input, which makes sense. That's what I want to happen. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to work. This does not. Nothing works at this point, because while I have enabled an input, I still haven't told it some basic information, like who am I talking about? Like who's hit the keyboard? Okay, fine. Who hits the keyboard? Well, I haven't determined that yet. So this is just the preliminary setup. If I step on the trigger, I'm going to enable the use of a key on my keyboard. And conversely, what I'm going to do down here is if I step off of that, I'm going to disable my input. And it comes up, and in this particular case, that's the only thing that I have. So I now have these two nodes. I have step on the trigger, enable a key input, step off of the trigger, disable that key input. I can't use the E key if I'm standing 30 feet away from the door to open it up. I have to be right inside that trigger for it to happen. Now, one of the things that I don't have yet, and you'll see this has nodes on it for the target, which is self, that would be you, the player, or the target player controller down here. Now, in this particular case, I need to tell Unreal that it's the player that we're talking about. So you, the person playing the game, is the one that has control over it. It's your keyboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a wire backwards out of this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in here, get player controller. Sometimes you don't have to type the whole thing. You'll notice if I just type in get player, it says that's the only thing that's in there that matches that. And you don't even have to put the space in there, which I've always thought was really nice. If I just put get player as one word, it still comes back and gives me the same choice. So you can either type it with spaces or type it all together. It doesn't really matter, which I think it's nice. I don't have to think about grammar or stuff like that. Okay. You'll notice the context sensitive button that's over here on the right. If you uncheck that, you notice you get all kinds of things going on. In this particular case, we want to keep that checked. There is going to be some instances where we uncheck it to find what we need. But I'll let you know when that happens. So I have a get player controller. Right? I'm going to swing that right over here. So I'm also going to wire this into the player controller down here on this one. So in essence, what this is saying, it's pretty straightforward. Step on the trigger, enable a key so the player can type on the keyboard. And if you step off the trigger, then you're going to turn off the ability of the player to use his E key. And again, I still don't have that set up, but this is your basic premise. Step on the trigger, enable a key, step off the trigger, disable that key. And it's the player who we're dealing with. Now, I've got two sets of triggers. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and draw a box around these so they're all highlighted. And I'm going to hit C on my keyboard, and I'm going to get this nice little comment window. You've seen this in the material editor. This allows us to go in and to put everything in a little box, which makes it easier for me to move things around. If I want to move an object, I can move an object. If I want to move them all, I can just grab this and click on them all, and I can do that. And that keeps these organized so I know specifically what this does. And remember, you're dealing with people sometimes who you did something and they don't know what you did if it's all just jumbled together. We're going to have wires all over the place, and it's a whole lot easier to keep this just a little bit organized so you can see kind of what's happening. All right, now I've got the front trigger, and what I need is to do the same thing for the back trigger. So I'm going to pause this here, and I'm going to have you do that yourself because it's going to be the exact same setup as this. You're just going to be using the other trigger. All right, so I've got it all set up. I have my front trigger and I have my back trigger. Now, I did the exact same thing. I went and selected my back trigger. I did a right click. I went to add event for door trigger back collision. I did the begin overlap. I edited the end overlap. And then what I did, which I didn't talk about before, but I'll talk about now, is that whenever you're duplicating things like this, I wanted you to do this one from scratch. Okay? I wanted you to build it again from scratch so you can get a sense of how you have to do that and how you have to wire it together. Okay? And how you can do that. Now, what I can show you is if you've got something like these three elements right here that are going to be duplicated. Now, you can't do that with these because this has to do with the back trigger, not the front trigger. So I just can't duplicate them and bring them down. But you can select objects that are going to be universal, and you can just hit Control W. And Control W will duplicate them. And then what I did was I just brought these down over to here, and I moved them into place, and then I wired them up. So I had them all set up and ready to go. Now, certain things, like I said, you can't do that with. In the case of this has to be the back trigger. I had to select the back trigger and add that in specifically, so I can't duplicate those and do that. All right, let's get into the actual movement of the door now. And this is going to get a little bit more complicated. Those are fairly simple and straightforward. It's two basically similar things. I'm just going to swing up over here, and I'm going to set it up. Now that I know that if I step on the trigger, the key works, step off the trigger, the key doesn't work, let's define the key. So I think what I'm going to use for this is the E key. Now, you can use the L key. You can use whatever you want to. It doesn't really matter. L for lights, you know, whatever you feel is important for something like this. But this is how that works. When you need to get a key, a specific key for something, all you need to do is right-click and type in E. And what it'll do is you'll see you have the whole list of all of the keys that you can use. And it's a big long one, and here I got all those different keys that I can use. In this particular case, I'm going to be using the capital E, not the one with the two different accents on there. I just want the regular E one, so I'll select that, and I'm going to get this little node that gives me two options. Either I've pressed something or I have released it. Okay. Now, what I'm going to need to do with this is where I need to check on whether or not my door is opened or closed. Because I talked earlier about I need to make sure that the player can't open up the door again in the middle of an open sequence. So we need to check whether or not the door is opened or closed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask the question, is the door open? Now, there's only two answers for that, yes or no. So because I need a variable now asking the question, is the door open? Or asking the status of the door in this particular case. The door is either open or closed. It's either yes or no. It's either true or false. That's going to make it a Boolean variable. So what I'm going to do is over here on the left side of my screen, under variables, you'll see there's a little plus variable over here. When you highlight it, there's a little plus sign, but when you try to move the mouse over it changes to plus variable. I'm going to click that. Try that again. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to get a new variable. By default, it's going to be a Boolean. That's far and away the most common type of a variable that we use. It's a yes or no statement, true or false. Door open, door closed, key pressed, key not pressed. So we're going to do that. And then what I'm going to do is, this is what's going to check the status. So I'm just going to name that door status. Now, with these, you can either put the space in there, you can leave the space out. It gets a little ambiguous in through here. I know we try to teach you never leave spaces. There are a lot of places in here where you can do that. I'll leave that up to you as to whether you want to do it. I'm going to go ahead and leave that as one word, door status. Okay. And then if you select it, you have some options over here in the panel. Now, in this particular case, we're not really going to do anything up here right now. We're just going to leave all of this stuff the way it is. But there's more. There are all kinds of elements that are up in here that we can deal with. Depends upon what it is we're doing. But in this particular case, it's just going to have a door status, and we need to know whether or not the door is open or closed. Now, this does not answer that question. We're going to answer that question using another variation on this, but for right now, that's all we need to know. Okay, and then in order to add this in here, what I'm going to do is let's look at it from this standpoint. When I press the E key, what is it that I want to happen? What I want to happen is I either want to open the door, or in the case of the door already being open, I don't want to open the door. So when I hit the E key, it's either going to open the door or it isn't. Now, a Boolean is a variable that is yes or no, true or false. When we're dealing with a choice of whether we're going to go on a true tack, yes, the key is open, yes, the door is closed, do this, or no, the key hasn't been pressed, or no, the door is already open, don't do this, we're going to need a node here that allows us to go in one of two directions, and that's called a branch. So I'm going to right click here, and I'm just going to type in branch and select it. And you'll see what you have is I've got a true and I have a false. So if I press the E key, I have a choice. If the door is going to be opened or closed, then it's either going to be true or it's going to be false. Okay. And then it asks me for the condition. The other thing here is the condition. Now the condition, you'll notice, is red. That's because it's a Boolean statement. What is the condition of the door? Is it open or is it closed? Well, in order for me to determine that, I need to get my door status, and I'm just going to drag it, and left click and drag it out here, and I'm going to get this little window. It's going to say get or set. Now, in this particular case, what I'm doing is I am getting the door status option. Think of that as the title of it. The title is door status, and then I'm going to have a couple of different statuses underneath that one. But basically, this is just the title door status I'm looking for, so I'm going to use the get command, the get section. In a second here, we're going to use the set, and I'll show you what that one does. So I'm just going to use get, and I'm going to get this little capsule shape right here. It's red, which means it can be wired. If it's red here and red there, that means they can be wired together, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag that in. So now what I'm going to do is I hit the E key, it's going to check the door status. This is all going to happen at the same time, and then depending upon what I say, it's going to then allow me to do something else. So in order to get that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, I'm going to get this door status, and I'm going to pull it back out again, and instead of using get, I'm going to use set, because I need to say whether or not the door is open or whether it's closed. And I'm going to duplicate that because I need two of them. I'm going to have one wired to true, and I'm going to have one wired to false. Now here's how this works. you hit the E key. It's going to check the door status and determine whether it goes on the true or whether it goes on the false. Okay? The door status right here has a little checkbox after it. Door status unchecked means the door is not open. Door status checked means the door is open and therefore I don't want the key to work. If the door is not open, no check mark, then I can open up the door. If it checks the condition of the door and the door is checked, that means the door is already open or in the process of closing. In this particular case, it could also be in the process of closing after we've gone through it, and I don't want it to do anything more than that. All right. So now we've got an E key all set up that's going to allow me to do one of two things. Either it will open up the door or it won't. So now it's time to actually animate the door opening. So we're going to go in and we're going to add a new node in here that called a timeline, and we're going to go in and we're actually going to animate the door itself opening and closing. So I'm going to walk you through that. Now, as soon as I add a timeline in here, it's going to add another tab up above, and that's where we're going to be working. So that's kind of watch for that up here as I do that. So what I need is I need an animation timeline. So I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to go clear to the bottom of this, and you're going to see add timeline down here. And that's what I want. Timeline node allows values to be keyframed over time. So I add that in, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on it, and it's going to open up this tab. Okay. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this thing. I'll leave the name. I'll change the name of this one up over here. I'm going to call this Door Opens. Okay. And what that does here is if I go back and look at my event graph, that's now changed that to Door Opens. So that's really all I've done. Okay. So real quick, I'm going to go back. I'm going to wire this up just so you kind of know where I'm going here. If you hit the E key, if the door is not opened, then go ahead and play the animation. We haven't done it yet, but just so you know. If not, then we're just going to click reverse. Okay, and that'll do basically the same. We could use stop, but we'll just use reverse because that works pretty easily for what we're doing. All right, go back. Let's go back up to that tab up here, and you can see it says Door Opens Template. Okay, now what have I got going on up here? I've got some float tracks, I have some vector tracks, I have event tracks, and I have color tracks. I've also got a curve asset that I can apply. This is a blank window. There's nothing in here yet. What I need is I need to add a float track. Now a float track basically is what allows me to go in and to type in whole or decimal numbers. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating keyframes on a timeline. I'm going to set a keyframe for the door closed when it's not moving. I'm going to set a keyframe for the door being fully open. I'm going to set a keyframe for the door staying fully open, and then I'm going to create a keyframe for the door when it's closed. And this is going to allow me, if I add a float track, it's going to allow me to use decimal numbers, which is what I need. I want to open up something 90 degrees. I want it to be at keyframe time 0 or keyframe time 1 second or 4.5 seconds. Those are all decimal numbers. So I'm going to be using a float track to do what I need to do. So I'm going to click the F+ sign here for float track. You're also going to see, it says here length 5.0. By default, animations are all 5 seconds long. I'm not too worried about that right now because you're going to see we're going to change that eventually anyway. But we've got that. This red line here is my timeline, and you can scroll your mouse button, you can scroll out, you can scroll in, you can move around. If you right click and hold, you can move it around. Basically what you need to know is this point right here is 0. That's 0 timeline, and it's 0 position in the world. Okay, and as I move it around, it goes all the way over to here. That's 5 seconds. It's preset to 5 seconds. So once you get past 5, it's grayed out. What that means is by default, nothing is going to occur after 5 seconds. So all my animations are going to stop after 5. Okay. What I need to do is I need to add in here, and let's go ahead and name this new track. I'm going to click on that new track. I'm going to call it door movement, and you'll see why here in a second. What this is if I just go back over and look at my event graph really fast, well, it's already done it now. Door movement was there. This is where I'm going to come out. When I want something to happen, when I need to determine how the door is going to move, whether it's going to rotate on its X or its Y or its Z axis, it's going to be coming out of here. So what I do is I give that a name. Door movement is the name of this, so I know what I'm wiring it to. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the Shift key, and I need to add a keyframe. I'm just going to click anywhere on this red line. It doesn't matter. You're just going to click. So I hold down the Shift key, and I left click on that line. Okay, so it's added it in. What appears up here, it says time 1.141, and value is minus 0.004. So what this happens now, what's this saying now, is this is now 1.5 seconds, in essence, into my animation, and the value of it is, in essence, 0. So I haven't really done anything. But what I can do is I'm just going to add that keyframe in there, because I can come up here and I can say, look, here's what I want. I want that keyframe. I want this mark at 0 in my timeline, and I want the value to be 0 in terms of movement. And when I hit Enter key after that, I now have a keyframe at 0 set to be a value of 0. Now, since we're going to rotate this door, basically what it's saying is the door is not rotated to start with. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the second keyframe. Now, in order to do this one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm just going to hold Shift and I'm going to click and I'm going to put that in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the time to be 1.5. So that's 1.5 seconds into my animation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the value up here to minus 90. Remember, the value in this particular case is going to be rotation. I'm going to rotate it minus 90 degrees. That means the door is going to open inwards. Now, if you don't want that to happen, if you want it to open up outwards, then obviously, instead of minus 90, you're actually going to go in there and you're going to set it to plus 90. Plus 90 would be door opens towards the player in this particular case. And what I want to do is I want to make that minus 90 so the door opens up away from me. So I do that, and it's like the keyframe is gone. What's happened to it? Okay. Also, you'll notice it says 90.000008. Don't worry about that. You could spend the next 20 minutes trying to take that 8 out of there, and it'll always add it back in there. That's 90, and then that's, what, 10, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000 millionths. That's a millionth. It's 8 millionths of a degree, which means you're not ever going to see it. It's minus 90 degrees. That's all we have to worry about. Now, I can't see it. And the reason is because it's gone way down below. It's gone way off the bottom of the screen down there. You can see that little red line is starting to drop down. So in order to see this whole thing in the window, you've got two little windows, little buttons here, zoom to fit horizontal and zoom to fit vertical. And now you can see you start up here at 0 and it goes down here to 1.5, which is minus 90 degrees. Right click and move that over. I'm going to add in another key right here. So I'm going to Shift, click. This one is going to go to 4.5 seconds. And it's going to remain at minus 90 degrees. Now what that's going to do is this is the door opening away from the player. And then for 3 seconds, it's going to remain open. And then what's going to happen after 3 seconds, I need to have it go back to where it was. So I'm going to Shift, click right there again. This one, I'm going to change that from 5 point something to 6. And then the value is going to go back to 0, which is then basically closed. So we'll set that so we can see it. So the door swings open 90 degrees. It stays that way for it takes a second and a half. It stays that way for 3 seconds, and then it takes a second and a half to close again. Works pretty good. Now, I talked a little bit ago about the fact that the pre-length of this is 5 seconds. I've already set my animation to 6, which means the door, it's going to cut off right here automatically. So in order to fix that, yes, I'm going to change that to 6. And now I have a 6-second animation. Door swings open and then swings shut. Now I'll talk just for a second here about Bezier curves. What is going to happen is the door is going to run at one speed. And things in life don't run at one speed. A propeller runs at one speed once it's started up. So if you're in a propeller-driven plane and you're flying at 400 miles an hour, your propeller is running at 400 miles per hour, and it runs at any point in your flight, it's running at 400 miles per hour and stays that way. It doesn't speed up and it doesn't slow down. When you start a propeller, however, it starts at not moving and then advances to 400 miles an hour, and it takes it some time to build up to that speed. And then if you decide to slow down, it takes a while for the propeller to stop moving. Same thing with your car. When you put your foot on the gas, you're not instantly going 40 miles an hour. The car has to build up speed. When you open up a door, the same thing. You reach over, you grab that door, you start pulling it open slowly, it speeds up, and then as you get near the end of it, you slow back down again until the door is open. That's the way things move in real life. These straight lines would indicate that that door is going to open up at a set speed, and it's going to stay at that speed all the way until it stops. It's not going to gradually open and gradually slow down. It's going to open and shut, open and shut. So we're going to fix that. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to turn these points and these straight lines into curves. And curves would indicate a gradual increase in speed and a gradual decrease in speed. So in order to do that, I'm just going to left click and I'm going to draw a marquee box all the way around all 4 of those keynotes there. And then I'm going to right click on any one of them, and it says interpolation: auto, user, break, linear, or constant. Linear means it's all moving at the same speed. It means pretty much the same thing as constant in this particular case. And you can think of it that way. It's moving at a constant speed. We don't want it to do that. We want it to gradually speed up and gradually slow down. So I'm going to change this from linear. I'm going to go up here to auto. And it's going to change all of these things. It adds what are called Bezier curves, named after a French mathematician. And it's the essence of everything that we do when we're dealing with lines, or we call them splines when we're dealing with 3D environments and 3D elements. This is a spline. And what this allows me to do is this allows me to control the shape of the curve, the lines coming into a point and the lines coming out of it. And what those 2 handles allow me to do is I can click and hold on one of them, and I can change the way that that is working. Okay, now in this particular case, what I would like it to do is I would like that to be as flat as I can possibly get it. I'd like this to be on a perfectly horizontal line. And the same thing with this one. I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it on a perfectly horizontal line. Because here's what this represents. The door is opening up. It starts out slowly. It picks up speed. That's full speed right in through here. And then as it nears opening, it starts to slow down again. And then it stops. The door is stopped all the way along and through here. Then the door is going to start to close. It's going to start to slowly. It'll pick up speed. This is about as fast as it's ever going to get, right in the middle and through here. And then as it nears the end of the life of the animation, it's going to slow down again. The closer you are to this white line, the slower you are going. The further away from it you get, the faster you're going. And then this just happens to be the door just remains open and doesn't actually move. You might want to maybe click on an individual one and make sure that you didn't change the value of that. That's still 1.5. That's still 0.9. And you can go in and you can get those things to be as flat as you possibly can, and you'll see the benefit of it. And once I have the whole thing up and running, I may go back and show you what happens if you don't have that thing flat, or if you've left those things as angular lines and not done these Bezier curves. All right, so that basically is my animation. Starts out slow, opens up, and then gets to the end, and then starts to close, and it's done. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to compile, And I'm going to save so I don't lose any of my work. And then I'm going to go back to my event graph. Now, nothing looks different. There's nothing about this that looks any different than what was happening before. It's still exactly the way it was, but that's all contained. This door opens template is everything that is inside of here. So I can just go back up and I can look at it and I can add new elements in there, or I can come back and I can edit that later on, whatever it is I would like it to do. Right? Now, so hit the E key. The E key again is going to check, is the door open already? Is it not open? If it's not open, go ahead and run the animation. If it is open, don't do that. Okay, shut the door again. Now what I need to do is I need to go in and specify what the animation is specifically going to be. Now, in order to do that, I need to go in and tell it which direction I would like it to move. I've got my move animation in here. This doesn't contain any information about which direction. I put 90 in here, minus 90 in here, but minus 90 in which direction? How would I like that thing to roll? Now, I included a picture out in the handout, which I'll bring over here and kind of show it to you. Okay, when we are dealing with motion of an object in space, we are not dealing with X and Y and Z anymore. Now we're dealing with, in essence, flight controls. So in an airplane, you have rolls, you have pitches, and you have yaws. Now they correspond to X, Y, and Z, but what you have to be aware of, and the reason why I included this thing in the handout for this, is that Unreal is going to refer to a yaw movement, or it's going to refer to a pitch movement or a roll, and you're not really going to know what that is. So this is a way for you to go back and look at it and see. But basically, think of this as a door. All right? If this was my door, and you saw the way the door was in here, so let's just say my door is coming about this size right here. All right? If I want the door to swing open, then I'm going to be wanting to move it on its yaw. It's going to be rotating on its z-axis. If I accidentally set this thing on roll for the x-axis, the door, which is sitting right here, would then roll this way. And so if this is the corner that's sitting on the ground, and I got my door right here, I probably should open that in Photoshop, but this is my door in perspective sitting right here, okay? This little space right here. It would then roll on its the corner on the floor. It would roll that way away from it and go through the floor and come back up. If I set it accidentally to pitch, then the door would basically fall down on the player and go through the floor and come back up the other way and stand back upright. So I need to know that I'm going to rotate this thing on the yaw axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here, and I need to go in and set my door movement. So I'm going to pull a wire out of my door movement, and I'm going to look for something called make rot, which stands for make the rotation. And whenever you need to rotate something, if you've modeled an object and you just want this object to spin in space, you're always going to use the make rot. So don't think, well, that's an odd name, I'm never going to remember that, because you're going to probably use it on virtually anything that rotates. If you're making a windmill, if you're making a light, like a lighthouse, and you want the light to rotate around, if you're running tires on a vehicle and you need the tires to rotate, you're going to use make rotate. You're going to come back and you're going to be using this a lot. So I want the make rotate right there. And you'll notice it comes in preset, because I just pulled it out. It's preset to pitch instead of yaw. Now, why did I do that instead of pull that out, rather than just go in and right-click and type in make rot? The reason I didn't just do that is that's not a good habit to get into, because you can see there are a lot of make rots in here, and it gets to be kind of confusing. Which one am I supposed to be using? Which one do I not want to use? Or in some cases, it'll give you variations that you can't use. Okay? So I always find it's best to make sure that if you are going to be dealing with the rotation on this, that you pull a wire out of here and make sure that that's the one that's available to you and not one of the other ones. Sometimes just right-clicking is going to give you options that can't be used. If I go in here and say make rot, and it gives me like one of these down here, I might get something completely different that I can't even wire in. This is not what I need, and I can't wire that into this object at all. So I'm wasting my time doing something like that. I start from the back end, or even the same thing is true from one of these. If there's something that you need to add on to this, if you pull out of it, you're only going to get choices that will go with it, not the vast library. You'll only get one specifically for it. So that's kind of why I did what I did. Now, it's set to be wrong because it's going to rotate that door on its pitch. And like I showed you, if I set that thing on a pitch, the door is going to basically slam down on the player's head, go through the floor, and come back up behind him. So that's really not what I want. So in order to change that, what you do is hold down the control key. If you hold down the control key, you can click on that wire and disconnect it and pull it down to where you want it and then let go. So now the door is going to rotate on its yaw, which is what I want. The Z-axis, it's going to rotate on the Z-axis. It's going to behave like a real door. All right, now, what I need to do now, and I have to do this one backwards. There's a purple or a lavender control coming out of this, okay? We'll come back to that in a second. But what I want to do is the update up here is what actually makes the animation work. So I'm going to pull a line out of here, and I'm going to type in set actor relative. I can't type. Set actor relative. That's probably all I need to do. Relative rotation. Here's what I'm doing with this little command right here. And this is important. There's a three-step process I have to do to make this thing work. I could stop right here. This could be it. This is really all I need in order to make the door work, is up to that point. Let's just skip that one that's out there. All right? So hit the E key. I've gone through this 100 times. It determines whether the door is open or closed, plays the animation, and tells it which way it's supposed to rotate. Sweet, that works. But remember, blueprints are designed to be universal. I'm creating a door blueprint that I would like to use in multiple places. Okay? I want the door here. Maybe I got a door on a second story, or I got a door on a building way out over here, or I got all kinds of things going on. But I have multiple doors. Okay, what this little setup right here does, make sure I get the right one, what this door right here is doing with this little doohickey right there, what it's doing is it is working in place. That door will work right there. But if I were to take another version of that BP Door 01 or BP Door 1 and move it somewhere else, all of the information that's located in here has to do with the position of the original door. If I put a second door in here, what it's going to do is it's going to then determine, there's the door, there's the original door. I want this door over here to work and rotate the exact same way as that one. Well, what if my other door isn't aligned? What if my other door, back over here, where to go? What if the other door that I was making this thing go from, let's delete that. Okay, got it. It's taking a couple seconds for it to do it. But let's say there's my door here, and I'm going to make a duplicate of that door, and I'm going to pull it back here. And I think it's having trouble doing that. And then I'm going to take it and rotate it, say 30 degrees. All right? So I don't know why it's not showing, but just make believe that that door is showing up right there. And I've rotated it 30 degrees. Well, this door is set from 0. When I did this one down over here, and I went in and I set my rotation, I started it at 0 and I rotated it 90 degrees. Okay, fine. That door, which isn't showing up, is rotated 30 degrees. So if I were to walk up to this, and it's in a wall that's at a 30-degree angle, I walk up to this door and I step on the trigger and I activate it, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to jump to 0 degrees, which would be straight a line, and then it's going to open up 90 degrees, and then it's going to close again, and then when it's done, it's going to jump back to a 30-degree angle. And it's going to look really bizarre. So what I have to do is I have to go in and I have to say, look, I want to make sure that I'm dealing with the individual rotation of an individual door. So that's what this little section is going to be out over here. So when I go in and I type set actor relative rotation, okay, what this does is this then determines where the door is in conjunction with the X, Y, and Z of the original, and then makes the adjustment. So if I take this and pull it aside and I had a door back over here at 30 degrees, what it would do is it would say, all right, the animation runs from 0 to 90. I'm at 30 already. Make the adjustment so it runs from 30 to 120. Instead of 0 to 90, it runs from 30 to 120. Or instead of 0 to 90, it runs minus 30 to minus 120. It takes it and it looks at it and says, relative to the world, where are you? And then make the adjustment so the door opens up correctly. This is a hugely important section to add into this. Failure to do this means the doors won't open correctly. The first one will, but that's not the point of a blueprint. The point of a blueprint is to be able to have multiple doors. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to tie these two strings together. So first thing I'm going to do is it says new relative rotation here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull backwards out of that and I'm going to say combine rotators. All I have to do is type in combine and we're going to get combine rotators and we're going to get this little window that's going to pop up like that. Now don't worry too much about all of these little numbers in here, and you're going to see why here in just a second. But it's going to say combine rotators, and that's what I'm doing is I'm saying combine its route, figure out where it is relative to 0, 0, 0 in the world, and then combine where you are in the world with where the animation is supposed to run from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to wire it to B. And you'll notice those numbers all go away. That's why I'm saying don't worry about them. Those numbers go away. So this is going to rotate 90 degrees based off of 0 to 90 on the yaw or the z-axis. We're going to combine that with where it is in the real world. But what I need to do is I need to say, okay, this sort of determines where it is, but it doesn't have the actual beginning positioning of it. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create one last variable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call that beginning rot for rotation. I don't have time to type or space to type the whole thing out. Beginning rot, and then over here on the right of this screen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this is where all of the other types of variables are located. And there's probably 50 or 60 of them in here. But the main basic ones are Boolean, byte, integer, float, name, string, text, vector, rotator, and transform. Boolean, yes or no. Byte has to do with basic memory information. Integer is a number. A float is a decimal number. Name, string is going to be text or a command line or a text that you want to have on the screen. String is text on the screen as opposed to text, which would be a text box or something like that. Vector is an area of the screen. Rotator is going to determine a rotation, or transform, we're going to move something. Those are the basic variables that we have in through there. And in this particular case, what we're looking for, because I'm defining beginning rotation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select a rotator. Type that in there again. Beginning rot. Okay, so it's a rotator. So it's over here in my variables. What I'm going to do is I'm going to left click and I'm going to drag that out, and I just want to use get. I just need this little capsule. I'm not doing anything else. This is going to be my A location. All right. Now, my variables over here, why is it that I did this beginning rot, but I didn't seem to be putting any basic information into it? Why is it that how does it figure out that this is going to look at its relative location, and then it says, go ahead and make the change from 0 to 90 to 30 to 120. Okay. Well, what this beginning rot variable does is it defines the beginning rotation of the door. That's all this is. All right? So this says wherever the door happens to be in the world, that is going to be something that you combine with this 90-degree rotation. So if this is sitting at 30 degrees in the world, and this is going to go from 0 to 90, what this says in combination with that one is rotate it not from 0 to 90, but from 30 to 120. And that does, and comes into here, and that's what does it. All right? So that right here is my keyboard movement. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and type in here C. Just put door opens. So I've got that there. And we're almost done. Just got one more little thing to happen. Okay, I've defined the beginning rotation over here, but I haven't really used it yet. So that defines it. But to use it, we've got to do something different. Okay? And that's a real simple one, and it's common, and you're going to see this a lot. It has to figure out where something is, and we're going to do it from the start of the game. So I'm going to right-click down here, and what I'm going to type in is event begin play. So anything that says event begin play, this means as soon as the game is spawned. So as soon as the game begins, this is what I want to happen. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to then say that is the beginning rotation. And then we're going to come down, we're going to pull a line out of that, we're going to type in get actor, and we're looking for get actor rotation. And that's all we have to do for that. And what this determines, okay, is the actor rotation when the game spawns. So where is that object in the world? That is going to be what this is. This is what, at the start of the game, looks at that actor, where that door is, because this is tied to the door. Where is that door in the world? And set that as its beginning rotation, and then come up here and say, all right, that beginning location now is fed into this information to come up with a position somewhere in the world. And it's an easy thing to test. If you want to test that on your own, you can do that. But I'll kind of maybe show you a quick thing if I go back and delete that and try to do it. But I'm going to go ahead and compile. I'm getting a check mark, so it's all good. I'm going to save that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this down. Pull this thing down, pull it off screen here. Pull it over there. And let's go in and get this thing set up. So there is my door. So if I go in to play this thing, I walk up to the door, hit E, nothing happens. Now the reason that does is because that is not a blueprint yet. That's just the regular door. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the door, and I'm going to make sure that my BP door 1 is selected down here in my content browser, and I'm going to right click on that door, and I'm going to come down to where it says replace selected actor with BP door 1. Now I am doing that because this is the habit you want to get into. It has to do with where the actor is placed. If I say, or where it is placed. If I say replace it, then it's going to match it exactly. If I say just place the actor in the scene, it's not going to delete that one. It's just going to put that actor out here with it. So I want to replace that one with the other door. And what you will see happen is those triggers are now there. I can see the trigger in my scene. so I know exactly where it is. If I come back behind the door, I can see the trigger back behind the door. Now, they don't show up in gameplay, but they are there so I can get a really good idea of where something is. And if I decide I'd like to go back and move that, all I have to do is go back and then open up my door, come back to my viewport, and I can say, oh, let's go to the front trigger, and we'll pull it forward slightly, and you can see it's actually moving over there in my scene. So it works in conjunction with the two things together. You got to make sure you compile it again. And then you're all set and ready to go. So let's test it out again and see what happens. I'm going to run up to the door and stand, basically I'm inside of that trigger. If I hit E, the door should open, and then I can go through, and the door closes behind me. If I come back to it, I hit E, door opens up, and I can come back through. Now, again, this is why I want to make sure you're not standing right up against the door when you hit E, because it does that. And that's kind of a weird thing. And basically, it went through me like twice, and then went ahead and did that. So I want to make sure that I am through that door. And I've got a door that functions. Okay. Now, just real quick, I'll take that door, and I'll put a BP door out over here. And then I'm going to rotate that like this. Let's go back and test it. Hit E. Door opens. There's another door over there. Hit E. Door opens. And you see it opens up correctly. It opened up 90 degrees at the angle that it was at. Smacked me in the face a couple times. And I can go back through it. All right, now if I went back really quickly, let's go back and show you what will happen here if you didn't do that. Let's open this back up, and I'm going to come back over to here to my template. Nope, I'll come back here to my event graph. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disable that just for a moment. Let's break that link. It's over here. Oh, I got to compile it first. So it's compiled. Let's go back and play it. And we'll go to this door, and we'll go through it. Make sure you're close enough. Okay, now, that door, if I hit E, you'll think, what happened? What just happened? Well, you notice it's now sitting, it's no longer at an angle. It's now sitting at that 90 degrees. And that's because it's being treated exactly like that door over there. That door over there was set up to be 0 to 90. So it just automatically bumped. Now, if I escape out of there, it goes back to being at an angle, but it isn't at an angle. If I come back over here and I wire that back up, what this does is this now reads the fact that figure out where you are in the world. Let's just run around the wall. Figure out where you are in the world, and then figure the angles out from there. All right, it works. All right, so that's a blueprint door. The first of the three that we're going to be doing. The next video I'm going to be doing is going to show you how to add a blueprint light in here. That light is going to contain, it's going to be a light model that's going to contain 2 physical lights. It's also going to contain a trigger box, and it's also going to contain text. And the text is going to tell you what to do so the player knows what to do when he gets to that particular light. The third video will be a variation on this door. What we'll do is we'll go back and we'll redo the coding, the node work. So you have to go pick up a key. You have to have a key in your possession for it to work. So stay tuned for those.